The Adam Reynolds Award this year was a residency, grant and bursary to create a digital artwork with the team at Hot Knife Digital Media, awarded and produced by Shape Arts. I had never worked digitally before, so after a number of really bad ideas, I got enough of the rubbish out of my system to come up with a concept I was truly excited about. Combining artistic goals of dissemination and disability activism, I would create a memorial in the form of a free downloadable app. Designing this artwork started with research. How would the design take form, and what would be placed into a memorial for disabled people to represent our diverse histories, our current achievements, and battles we still face? I visited and researched historic sites and existing memorials dedicated to other groups of people, and I explored common features, recurring motifs and objects. I questioned why memorials weren't made for disabled victims, and considered our place in society both throughout history and in current times. In response to this, I wondered how a memorial would look if it had been created by people who wanted to record their community's history, but didn't have the funds or support to create a large-scale, glorious monument. Where would they find an unused cheap space? What would it look like? How would you include classical, stereotypical features? What would exist around it? And would it even be accessible with those limitations? I visited museums, libraries and archives and started to pull out key historic moments that concern disabled people, but are not widely known or remembered. I was greatly disturbed by the lack of information on these topics. I sketched out the space and created a mood board to present to Shape Arts and Hot Knife, with detailed drawings, lists of objects that could be engaged with, colour palettes, surface textures I'd photographed, and descriptions and examples of things like lighting and sounds in the space. It was a new challenge trying to get an artwork in its early stages out of my head and visible to partners who were going to help me make it. Next came the details, taking individual features and fleshing them out. I had created preliminary sketches of stained glass windows and wanted them to be in a classical style, although in the shape that would be found in a basement, which was the abandoned overlooked space I decided upon. Within the time limits for creating the project, I had to find partners I could work with, and for this stage I was thrilled to find Eleanor Bird, the founder of Glass Schemes. It was a bit of an odd request to ask a stained glass designer to draw up the designs for, but not make, the windows. But working with Eleanor was amazing. We had emails and Zoom calls discussing the project, going through edits and adjustments, before they sent me the brilliant final drawings to my designs. When we discussed colour, I made the colour guide way too garish. So Eleanor looked at what I created as a starting point and then pared it back to make it more classical. So how I wanted it but couldn't figure out how to do myself. They understood and refined my aims into their craft. When the drawings arrived, they were taken to be scanned at high resolution and then sent to Hot Knife with the final colour plan. Hot Knife took the designs into the game engine Unity and built up the virtual versions of the windows. I had visited the Imperial War Museum in 2013 and remembered seeing a table in the Holocaust Memorial that had haunted me ever since. It was a dissection table used for experiments and the involuntary euthanasia of disabled children and adults. I wanted to use it as the basis for the design of the altar in the memorial, but when I went back to find it, it was gone. I searched their online archives and collections, but there was no photo, no record of it. I contacted the museum's library and was kindly put in contact with a curator and archivist, who told me the table was originally loaned to them by Kaufbeuren Psychiatric Hospital, and a replica was created for the display once the original was returned. When the old galleries were dismantled, the reproduction table was disposed of, and they were unable to find any photographs of it in their catalogues. However, they gave me information on where it was from and how it was used, so I was able to research it and find images of the table. I worked with those images to feed my designs. Within the concept, it was important to include an interactive rubbing plaque like those in old churches, where the viewer could take a rubbing and take that image away. I wanted to create this both virtually in the app and in real life as a physical object installed in a public space. The initial stage of this was a lot of drawing. I created a battle scene that filtered down into a hell scene, but the top 2/3 of the image, so basically the entire battle, didn't feel right for the message. I wanted to focus on the hell scene entirely. More drawings ensued, and then I scanned all the images and began editing and masking them out in Photoshop, and tested building a scene with them. But I knew something was wrong. The images weren't shaded enough, and I felt I could do better. So I made the decision to take all the drawings and rework and shade them. Next, I realised that the light direction would have to be coming from the same spot for them to all be in a scene together, so once again I reworked them. I rescanned the drawings, which took a week after a saga with 2 broken scanners. However, the shapes of the figures had changed, and I couldn't reuse the masks I had created on Photoshop before. Time wasn't on my side, and I had to find a partner who could mask and edit the new scans. I worked with a creative professional called Jack Felgate. We spoke over Zoom and emails, and Jack took all of the scans, masked them, edited imperfections, removed grid lines, and colour matched all the images. This took a huge amount off my plate so I could work in other areas. He sent me the first round of masks and edits for each image, and I checked them all and highlighted any areas I needed further changes, and then the final versions were uploaded and sent over. I hadn't been happy with my first attempt at the scene composition. To be honest, my Photoshop skills just weren't up to scratch, and my files kept crashing on me. I needed to call in some support, so I worked with Mike Faulkner, a technical instructor in computational arts, who I'd worked with before as his skills and knowledge are exceptional. Working together in person, we composed the scene, working first on the background, the middle, then the foreground. Getting them all to look the same size for each depth was tricky, but we used head size as our guiding point and it worked. Some individual figures needed brightness and contrast tweaking to merge with the scene, and it was brutal seeing figures I'd spent days drawing getting hidden behind others. But this is where it was also great to work with a partner with more distance, who could remind me when the scene took precedence over the individual drawings and nudge me when I was being too precious. Next was to turn the scene into both a virtual and real-life rubbing plaque. I spoke with Hot Knife, and they explained that the 3D model plaque would have to be made and approached in a different way to how the physical piece would be constructed. We went through a couple of versions until we came to a design and textures that looked as close as possible to how I wanted the physical plaque to look. If only the physical version had been so easy. Research and development went into overdrive. We laser cut into acrylic to try different dot patterns and pixelations to recreate the shading of the scene. Sometimes we thought we were close, only to expand the test scene and realise it didn't work elsewhere. It had to work with wax, pencil and normal paper that anyone would have access to, so that any member of the public who discovers it can take that work away for free. I spent 2 days trying to track down rubbing plaque wax, and I met the last person in the UK creating this product in the traditional craft. I was really lucky to speak with Michael Ward, and it turned out they were also an expert in creating rubbing plaques. We had a fascinating discussion, and I got a lot of incredibly helpful advice. And that's when I had to make my next unpleasant decision. I stopped the acrylic trials. I would have to redraw the scene in lines and cross-hatching. I had the scene printed and ordered tracing paper to begin again. Failure is always disappointing, but it is where I learn the most. I thought, if I've put this much time and work into it already, then it's worth getting it right. Another key part of this project is sound. I have absolutely no experience or skills in sound production, but I knew I wanted a soundscape and specific lighting to accompany this work that had a meaning and metaphor within the context of the piece. I needed another partner, but finding the right person was difficult, as what I was asking for was complex. Some of the aspects were Foley designs, so creating sound effects for the different noises and actions inside the app, while others were combining Foley recordings with composition and editing it into what in essence is a story through sound, that also had to sound like it was coming from outside and above the memorial. Through a recommendation, I met Nicholas Farris. Nicholas is a sound designer and artist who can do just about everything. He sent me his showreel and I visited a sound piece he was exhibiting at the time. Their work was phenomenal and I was thrilled when he accepted the job. Speaking on Zoom and through emails, Nicholas asked me for the sounds I needed creating for the gameplay and for a breakdown of the soundscape timeline and what happened and the sounds needed at each key point. I had previously provided the story of the soundscape, but now it was fascinating having to break it down for each element. It was an insight into sound in a way I hadn't considered it before. As I spoke with Hot Knife and Shape Arts about the progress of the soundscape, they highlighted that there were more sounds I hadn't even considered we would need, such as for the holding screen for the app or sounds for pop-up boxes of text and speech. Again, we constructed scene descriptions of what I needed for things like the holding scene. Cars driving by, wind blowing, a can being kicked down the road. Nick would send the sounds, I would listen and reply with any edits, and adjustments were made. We needed actors for points in the sound scene, and we had a meeting just discussing how the speakers needed to sound, the intonation, the content. Even though you wouldn't hear the words in the final piece as the voices are muffled, the content of the discussion would affect how people would speak, and as such needed to be correct so the listener could potentially deduce what was going on above them in the final memorial. I found source material online of how I wanted the voices to sound, and Nicholas created scripts for the actors and was able to direct them in what we needed. For the main soundscape, it had to sound like it was coming from above and through wooden floor, and that included adding in effects of the sound bouncing around the basement memorial. I learnt so much from this partnership, and Nicholas's skills were so valuable to bringing this idea to life. For a number of the sounds, lighting effects needed to be paired to them. For example, a car driving by outside would light up the stained glass windows, or the sounds coming from the room upstairs needed the effects of people moving about above, disrupting the light coming through the gaps in the floorboards. Not to mention, I wanted the user to explore the space with a torch. Hot Knife created exceptional lighting designs for these areas. We spoke about what I was looking for, and they would come back with beautiful effects and tests for me to look over, even some where I could test out the different brightnesses and different light lengths until we came to the perfect spot. Throughout the project, working with Andrew, Dean and Amy at Hot Knife to create this work was a brilliant experience. From adjusting the look of the outside of the building in the intro scene, or discussing a texture, or to the design and colour of the staircase, everything was easy and an exciting partnership. Text is a key part of this artwork and game. I had already completed the research for the histories and stories I wanted to tell, but now came triple-checking my facts and reassessing my sources for reliability and bias. When it was time to write, my first draft was way too long and convoluted. It was edited over and over, sleeping on each new edit only to spot issues the next day. It was rewritten and edited again and again. For accessibility, it was great working with Shape Arts and Hot Knife. We considered accessibility from as many angles as we could think of, and that were doable within the project. The Mine is an app, and I wanted it to work on as many phones and tablets as possible, and not solely on expensive high-end devices. Hot Knife explained this meant we needed to consider the creation of everything with a small file size in mind, compromising on effects, and limiting complications among other things, so it would work on more devices. This was really important to me, so it was an easy sacrifice to make. For example, each asset, so things like gargoyles or plaques, went through a similar process. Hot Knife took my drawings and designs for different parts and sculpted the forms in ZBrush or Blender, which produced detailed, high-resolution models. But the models' poly counts were too high for mobile devices to display in real time. To overcome this, they produced low-resolution models that follow the form of the high-res ones. These models are then unwrapped, flattened, so the texture can be projected onto the model. They then bake the detail from the high-resolution to the low-resolution model and take this into a painting package to colour and texture. The final models and textures were then exported to the game engine. Shape Arts factored in so many accessibility features in the production. Captioning for sound effects, fonts and colours, audio walkthrough experiences, audiobooks, BSL professionals for key areas, and more. Being disabled myself only means I know the challenges from my own conditions and impairments, not everyone else's. Shape Arts brought a wealth of knowledge to improving the project, and both myself and Hot Knife were eager to take on their advice and explore ways we could make this app as inclusive as we could. Once we had the project to a fully formed beta app, Hot Knife gave myself and the Shape team access to it as developers to explore the space on our own devices. We started fine-tuning the final piece, creating snag lists and making small tweaks to perfect it. The description for the app was written up, hosting and getting it on the app stores was next. This stage included a lot of back-end work, presenting all features which might mean it needed age restrictions, detailing how it met both the Android and Apple criteria for an app, and choosing thumbnail images and titles. This project was a very different style of working than I have ever done before. There was a substantial amount of research and creative direction in the project, and it was a fascinating experience that I've learned so much from and that will continue to feed into my career and future projects. Working on a project for the Adam Reynolds Awards was amazing, as Reynolds was an artist whose work really impacted me, and when people advised me not to make work about disabilities early on in my professional practice, his work and that of others gave me strength in my convictions, and my belief that art has a duty to try and affect change for the better. Working with Shape Arts has been a top moment in my career. They have enabled me to make projects that I could only have dreamed of and challenged me to think outside my own creative sphere and experience. Team members Jeff, Ellie and Emily at Shape have gone above and beyond to support my artistic ambitions, and quite honestly me as a person as well. They are exceptionally skilled, generous with their time, and also super kind people. I can't imagine having been able to create this work without them. Thank you so much. This artwork and its aims are ongoing. Next for this project we hope to create a physical iteration of the work, one that people can walk into and explore in the real world. We are currently looking for a gallery space to host it, and are in the process of applying for funding. And soon the physical rubbing plaque will make its way into a public location for people to discover and take a form of the work away with them in a rubbing.